All right, so let's back up and talk about like what are the barriers to reporting success? What keeps people from being successful in reporting? I've sort of already, skipped to what I see as a big part of the answer, which is implementing governance as a solution. But what's the barriers? So to understand the barriers, you first want to understand what it means to be successful. So you want to have a clear path from question to answer. When someone has a question, they can get the information they need. That everyone sort of shares an understanding of that reported data and what that data means. That those reports facilitate decision-making or operations. They're useful. They give people the information they need to act. That there's trust in the data, that not only is it useful, but they trust it, so they can act. Without trust, they won't act at all. And that there's adoption, that as many people as necessary are able to engage in the overall process. So some of the barriers that you get, and I've done these types of sessions at conferences, and we talk to clients, and I ask a lot of questions. I ask this question a lot in a group, and we're not going to do it in this forum because it just doesn't work so well in a go-to-meeting online session. But the types of answers I usually get are things like, we have incomplete requirements for the reporting. We've got data quality issues. There's a lack of knowledge about the data. There's a lack of training or knowledge about what available reports or the tools. There's political issues. There's not a lot of cooperation between the departments, maybe IR and IT, or the business users and everybody else, or whatever. We also see issues where there's sort of silos between IT and IR doing different reporting and not speaking the same language. An interesting note that most times if you take a poll of people in IR and take a poll of people in IT and ask them whether or not they say the data is, or they say the data are, right? The data is good. The data are good. The data is bad. The data are bad. Like IT people tend to be like 90+% data is people, and IR people tend to be 90% data are people, right? For various reasons, right? And I always find that fascinating. So that oftentimes they don't even speak the same language, but we need to get people aligned in that, in talking about their data in the same way. We may not solve the plurality problem, but we can solve other transparency issues. Lack of resources and time is a big barrier. Issues with access to the data you hear about. Slow turnaround for new reports or data. Like if you can't get what you need fast enough, it can really, it can affect your ability to use it. And then lack of trust as a big one. So the issues I think that really impact adoption that we see is this lack of knowledge about the data that undermines your either ability to create things and use the tools effectively, or to understand it. Lack of good training about what's available or the tools that exist, or the data that's out there. Issues with access, not having appropriate access, and then lack of trust. So our sort of observation here, and something we've been saying for quite a while, is that first of all, you sort of acknowledge that reporting is hard. I think a lot of times one of the issues with reporting tool adoption is that depending on who you've bought your tool from or who's implementing a solution, it is in the interest of the salespeople to tell you that this is going to be turnkey and magic and solve all of your problems, right? That really sets up everyone for failure because reporting is hard and it's difficult and it's an ongoing process. It's not it's not something that I create a report and then I'm done. I've solved. That's it. Right in my hands. I've solved reporting at my school. So if you acknowledge that it's a difficult process and that it requires a lot of communication and effort, then you can set yourself up for success. The second is that many institutions continue to struggle with reporting. So it's a fact that lots of schools struggle. We see it all the time. I'd still say most are struggling. Some schools, however, are successful. And when they're successful, if you look at it, it's not like, oh, hey, one school's successful with Tableau and another school's like every school who uses Tableau is successful and every school that uses some other solution is not. Like people succeed or fail regardless of the tool. So many schools have failed with the same tools. So this is what we've just seen with working with over 500 schools, that it doesn't tend to be the tool that's causing the success or failure with the process. There is sort of a minimum bar of best practices and activity and process for reporting that if not met, it doesn't matter what tool you have. So our sort of saying is that institutional reporting is not a technology problem. So that's the first thing. First sort of major takeaway here is that if you're struggling with adoption on your reporting tools, the first inclination, and it's natural to do, is to blame the tool, right? Oh, the tool's too hard, or no one likes it, or the color of my pie chart isn't good enough, or whatever. But that's I would say that's not typically the issue. So, but what does make a difference? Having communication, open line of communication between the departments and the requesters and the developers, collaboration between people within your institution, having good knowledge of the data by as many people as possible, transparency around the data. So if I'm looking at a report, understanding where that came from or how other people have built things, having some sort of governance or ownership structure, so you feel like you know where to go if there's questions, but also B, that there's sort of validation that this has been reviewed and approved on. Having well implemented reporting tools, it's not necessarily a tool, but the process of implementing and the training around that, having these best practices of data governance, having some sort of knowledge base to store all of that content, the data governance content that we talked about, and certain collaboration tools to sort of interact with the stewards and each other, and having good training and documentation for that information. Those things tend to matter more than the, whether or not it's in SQL, or if there's a drop and drag, or there's a pivot table, or it's just a spreadsheet. These things tend to be more important. So these all fall into the area of data management and data governance. So, and they also tend to fall into this concept of people problems. It's like process and people issues as opposed to technology. So when you are looking at the issue of poorly implemented projects or lack of use of a reporting, of a data warehouse, or whatever technology you're rolling out, or project that you're completing to help your institution, you should be looking at the people problem in a greater percentage than the technology issues. So whether or not people are going to use this is more about whether or not you're setting up the people who will be using it to be successful, more than whether or not you're setting up the technology to be in place well. Obviously, you need to have technology that works, but if you think about your effort, it doesn't seem intuitive when you're starting because you're working on a technology project, but really you have to understand that you're working on a people problem. And the technology needs to be there, but the people problem, without the people problem being solved, every dollar invested in technology is a waste. This is what I think most people tend to do, is that they spend majority of their time working on implementing the tool, and then that's an afterthought around, all right, how do we roll this out? How do we get people to use it? So when we look at what successful reporting, having that trust in the data and the adoption of tools and reports is important. That if you deal with those people problems, you want to focus on that. All right, so we say that to be successful and to get adoption, you need trust, training, understanding, and transparency. So those 5 things: trust in the data, good training, good understanding of the information, and transparency to what's in the system.